Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing week 15 of my 2020 reads. This week I read two books, both of which I've been looking forward to for quite a while. The first book that I finished was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. This is her new release that is based on a previous short story, The City Born Great, which you can find in her book, How Long Till Black Future Month. And this story is really interesting because it's sort of an urban fantasy, but in a way that is very different from traditional urban fantasies. This urban fantasy takes place in modern day New York, where the city of New York itself is becoming sentient, and it has avatars for each of the boroughs of New York, which represent it, and they fight against kind of a very, very bad Lovecraftian evil from another dimension. So this story follows those avatars as they are waking up, as they are fighting against this kind of Lovecraftian evil, and also trying to understand what they're doing, because these are real people that have become avatars for their boroughs. I loved the way that the magic system worked. I loved how each of the boroughs personified that aspect of New York. So you have Manhattan, which cares about money and power, and you have Queens, which is all about immigration and up and coming, and you have Brooklyn, which is all about the history. And it's just so interesting seeing each of these boroughs and how they're personified, and they each have magic that is related to who they are, what their persona is, what their borough is, what gives them power is kind of their own truth. And that is fantastic. I really loved all of the parts where we're learning about the boroughs, where we're understanding who they are, where they're discovering their power, where they're fighting against this Lovecraftian evil. And what's interesting about the evil is that it is not just, tentacles and scariness. It is also this infiltration of hatred and bigotry and sexism. And so in a sense, these boroughs are fighting against hatred. They're fighting with their diversity against a monolithic culture. So things like the Lovecraftian evil can take over certain chain restaurants, things like that. And it's just very interesting how political this book is and how much it takes the context of the current world, and especially this kind of resurgence of racism and sexism and hatred, and posits that that is this sort of influenced by Lovecraftian evil, and that we have to fight against it by coming together, by using our own diversity and power. And I loved that message. If you're somebody who does not like political messages though, or who just isn't in the mood right now to deal with a lot of triggering content that talks about things like police brutality and unfair systems and racism and just all of that, this may not be the book to pick up right now. But I found that all very, very fascinating. I really loved it. I also thought that the magic and the way that these characters are introduced was just so stunning and so thrilling. However, the last third of the book sort of got bogged down in my opinion. So whereas the first 2/3 is all about learning about these characters and you're very immersed in the story, the last third goes into a lot of kind of info dumping about what's actually going on. And it just went on for chapters and chapters, and like 20% of the book just ended up being kind of a big info dump, and that slowed things way down. And even though I liked the complexity of the world, I really did not enjoy having it all kind of thrown at me at once without any sort of character development or understanding of what was going on currently for the characters. So that part was just, it slowed things down a lot for me. Also, the ending didn't work as well for me. So the ending of this has some battles, but they didn't feel as epic as the battles in the beginning half of the book. And so that was a weird balancing for me. I generally expect the latter half of the book to have bigger battles than the beginning half. So that was weird. And the way that everything kind of tied up also wasn't fully satisfying to me. Even though this is going to be a trilogy, and definitely I expect things to not be 100% resolved, it didn't even feel mostly resolved. I kind of wanted the arc of this story to have a more concrete resolution than it did. And that could just be a personal thing. Other people can be more okay with a story that is just a temporary pause in the action, with more going to be happening later. But it just left me kind of not feeling fully satisfied. So overall, I loved so much about this book, but I did find that it had kind of pacing issues at the end and wasn't resolved in quite the way that I preferred. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The other book that I finished this week was Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions by Valeria Luiselli. This is a book that I'm pretty sure I heard about from Priscilla at Bookie Charm, who I will link below. And she always has the absolute best recommendations for anything to do with social justice. So if you haven't checked out her channel, please do. She has really, really great recommendations. This is a book that I'd heard her talk about and had been on my radar, and I'm a little bit behind in my priorities for reading social justice nonfiction. If you don't know what that is, I'll link a video talking about that below. But this is a really good one because it's very short. So it's just about 100 pages, and it is so impactful. This is such a powerful volume. It's basically, Luiselli is weaving in together kind of a memoir of her experiences as the US has been facing a lot of influx of child refugees, especially from Central America in the past 5 years, working as a volunteer interpreter. So sort of what kind of got her into that, sort of the conversations that she's had with her own children about it, her experiences working as a volunteer. And throughout this all, she interweaves not just her personal experiences in her life, not just the experiences with interviewing these children who are applying for asylum or some sort of status in the US, but also a lot of history and a lot of context explaining what's going on. Why do we have all of these child refugees? What is happening? Why are they being placed in these sort of detention camps? What's going on with the acceleration of processing of these cases, and why that's really bad for the kids? What's happening? Why are these kids not getting any sort of legal services? It's just really, really powerful to hear her story, which is very, very personal, but also get all of this political context and understand what's going on. I was vaguely aware of the situation, but this really filled in a lot of important information, especially things like kind of how the grander political systems and a lot of choices that have been made for the past few decades, especially regarding things like deporting people in gangs back to Central America, and things like the drug trade, and how a lot of that is contributing to what's going on with the refugees. It's just really, really impactful, really powerful. I definitely cried multiple times in this. The personal aspect is so gripping, and Luiselli has just the most beautiful writing. I thought it was almost poetic at times, and I just loved this. It was so heavy in terms of content. So definitely, warnings if you're triggered by, I don't know, anything such as just mass injustice. But it also had such beauty in the writing and such a personal feel, and just this connection, these conversations with little kids trying to explain why they fled from their countries. And these are all children who have entered the US illegally on their own, by themselves. And so it's just a very, very fascinating book that looks at what's going on there. So I Highly recommend this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I will do a standalone discussion of this as part of my nonfiction social justice project, talking more in depth about all of these issues because I think it's a really fascinating topic. So I really recommend this book, and pick it up if you have any interest in the topic. Okay, so that wraps up week 15 for me. If you have read either of these books, please let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Oh, and I will also link, there's some good reviews coming out right now of The City We Became, and since this is such a big new release, I'll go ahead and link down below a couple of the reviews that I've seen other people do, because a lot of them have really good things to say as well. Anyway, if you have anything to add, any comments you'd like to share, please leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you.